I'm sure I've made mistakes with things. I'm sure I've, tweeted, thoughts that weren't fully formed, whatever, more on the sort of just being a snarky jackass kind of side of things. But nothing that like comes to mind as like some grave error of judgment or values that I can think of.
Welcome back to the Slice Tennis Podcast presented by Betway, hosted by my guy Steven Boughton and then your boy JP Hovey. Today, we're going back-to-back interviews. Last week, we had Double XL. This week, we have Ben Rothenberg. If you are on tennis Twitter at all, you 1,000% know who this is. And we have an awesome interview coming up. Steven and I will be asking the questions that you all are hoping we will ask. And before we get into all that, we do need to talk about our weeks. And there is something specific that I got to know how you did this, because a while back, Steven, or last week, you said Tommy Paul outright winner in where did he play? Where did he win?
Stockholm.
In Stockholm, and you said before the tournament started, he's going to be the winner. I'm saying, how did you see this? How did you find this? Because I don't know if anybody was watching tennis like you were watching tennis on Tommy Paul. Where were you seeing this?
Well, where I was watching it was on Tennis TV. And I actually forgot about that, JP, that I called that. But I did call Tommy Paul to win Stockholm before the tournament. He was a 4 seed. It wasn't like a shoe-in. And he did go on and win it. So congrats to Tommy Paul. But Tennis TV is another presenting sponsor of The Slice. And yes, that is the Tennis TV. It's the official streaming service of the ATP Tour. Now, that matters because it's the official streaming service. So it's like where you can get the actually quality streams. And I know, JP, you have a Tennis TV account. Is that right?
I do. I actually just subscribed this year, almost right when I started with The Slice. I said, all right, I need to take it to the next level. Because personally, one of my favorite things I can do, since time zones can be off, go back, watch the reruns of the matches, catch highlights, catch summaries, all of these things on Tennis TV. For me, it's perfect because I got to digest it quickly. So
yeah,
Tennis TV brings it for you.
Yes, and it's the only legit way to do it. I've done illegal streams of matches before, tons of times. It's just a pain in the butt trying to find out where they are, trying to reload the pages, trying to navigate all the pop-ups. So click the link below to try Tennis TV, and you can watch all the ATP matches live or on replay and a bunch of like historical classics. So shout out to Tennis TV for supporting the show. Link below.
Yes, we love Tennis TV. They had us off to a great start after Tommy Paul's winning. Steven, what else happened within your week minus a big dub from our guy?
Yeah, big dub from our pick. In general, my week, again, a lot of the same, kind of just hanging out with my son, helping out my wife as much around the house and trying to keep things smooth. But yeah, I feel like the tennis is like, it's again, we've talked about this a bunch. Like it's a funny season, it's part of the season, but I've been enjoying watching these tournaments because I was at a lot of these tournaments 2 years ago, to the day. I was at Stockholm. I was watching that whole tournament go down. I was at Paris, Bercy, which is a week and a bit from now. I was at Basel when Felix won. So yeah, I've just kind of been watching TV, hanging out with Shepard and my wife, and just trying to kind of enjoying life. There was actually a massive rain here in Vancouver Island, and water started coming into our basement, where I actually am now at world headquarters of The Slice. But it's like, so I was dealing with that a little bit. I got the dehumidifier going. I got it all. Apparently it's like we're renting this house, and apparently it's just like a thing that happens when it rains a lot, which that's just living in the Pacific Northwest. Am I right? But yeah, that's me. JP, how was your week?
I love it. My week was good. I went to a wedding in Charleston where I actually met a large group of guys from Toronto. And they were down there celebrating, I think the couple maybe had eloped. And so when they came back, sort of their party was to go to Charleston, South Carolina, which is a beach town. They were staying out on Folly Beach where I did my bachelor party. And I was chopping it up with them, telling them about The Slice, of course, telling them about Betway, telling them about Tennis TV.
Mm.
But it was funny because they were like, they were complaining to me. They found out I worked with some NFL people. They're like, man, the NFL media coverage is ruining the hockey coverage. It's the off season, and we're hearing about the Cincinnati Bengals. We don't care about the Cincinnati Bengals. We need to know what's going on with the Leafs and Austin Matthews and all these things. And I was just dying, like the small cultural differences in the sports, but
Totally.
it was funny, man. And they could not recommend the Pacific Northwest and Vancouver enough. They were like, you got to go see your boy out there. It's beautiful.
Really?
They were saying they've only been one time and their one trip was awesome. They're like, obviously it's far from Toronto, but they were speaking very highly of it.
Yeah, well, people don't realize it's like Toronto to where I live is the same distance as like New York to like LA. Like it's not close. So it's like but yeah, people love to come out here, but a lot of them feel like there's no way to live out here. That's interesting. Yeah, the Canadians love hockey. And I will say I would love to. There's like a cultural difference. Obviously, Americans love football like unbelievably, and like, but like, and like, is there that following in like the cities? Like, I don't know, who's your NFL team?
So I grew up kind of the NFL team where I live is the Titans. I was kind of a Falcons fan growing up.
Like in tennis in Nashville, is it like any trade that happens with the Titans? Is it just like totally dissected by everyone and everyone's talking about it? And like the best players are just like, can't leave, like can't go out. Is that what it's like?
Yes. And it happens every year. And same as in hockey, I'm sure. But it's like the off season is always the worst time of it because all the rumors hit. All the fans have their biggest voices. You're just like, oh my gosh. But,
Spitting chicklets, rumor boys.
Yes, but we love spitting chicklets. Actually, this coming weekend, I'll be at a wedding that I don't know if he'll be there, but Roman Josi, he is friends with this couple as well. He's the captain of the Preds for all you hockey fans. Really nice guy too.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, hockey season is back on. It's electric. Ben, who we're going to be interviewing here, is a big Flyers fan, hockey fan. So that's funny too. So we got a multi-sport, tri-sport attack here on this podcast.
Diverse, baby, diverse.
Cool. Sounds like you had a good week.
Yes, and Steven, I know we got some other tournaments kicking off this week, so I have to get into the best bet of the day presented by Betway. The best place to bet is Betway. Got to be 19 and up to play, and it is in collaboration with iGaming Ontario. Please play responsibly. You had call of the season last week. Do you have anything for us this week, or are we playing more conservative?
Yeah, I don't know. They're not showing the outrights yet here on the app, but I am looking at one right here, and I've got. This is interesting. Okay, so this is for Wednesday. This is, and if you're following along here and you like to bet on sports, go follow me and the Slice on the Betway feed. I post videos directly on there with picks. So you guys saw me pick Tommy Paul. Could have helped. Just saying. So Wednesday, Holger Rune, who's been having an absolutely atrocious year, is playing Nicholas Jarry, who is one of the scariest players on tour. And they've got Holger Rune at -400 to win as a favorite. And they've got Nicholas Jarry as the +300. What's that? What's the opposite of a favorite? The loser.
He's underdog.
The underdog. The +300 there. So I think that is like that's a lot closer than that. I'll tell you that for free. Like
I love that.
Holger Rune is a better player. He might win, but Nicholas Jarry can upset anyone, especially on a quick indoor court. So yeah, I would be smashing that 300 +300. $1, turn it into $4. That's what I'm going to do it. I'm literally placing the bet right now, putting money where my mouth is. And yeah, that's my best bet of the day.
Hey, no cashing out. You better not cash out.
I can't confirm or deny after. There's no visibility after the bet goes down.
Dude, I'll tell you this. There was a guy, and he has to remain anonymous because he works at a financial place, but he had a parlay going that he needed one. It was like a 6-leg thing.
Yeah.
And he needed one more to hit. He had the opportunity to cash out. I think he bet $60 or $70. If he won the parlay, he was going to win 120 grand. If he cashed out where he was without this other guy fulfilling his bet, he could have made $16,000. Now the chances of that guy doing what he needed to do were
Yeah.
low. And he was hitting. He was like, what do you think? What do you guys think I should do? Should I cash out? Mind you, the week before he hit like a 12K parlay.
Crazy.
So he was rolling it, and he was like, I have to ride it out. I have to see it through. And of course, the guy didn't score his second touchdown, and he missed out on the 16 grand. And I was just like, oh, man.
You know what? That does sound painful for some people, but I'm trying to put myself in his shoes. If he had just won $12,000 the week before, and mind you, and he's maybe, you said he works for a financial institution, so maybe he's doing okay anyways. I think the odds, like, you got it like 16K, like, definitely helps out. You know, it helps out more in certain areas, right? Sometimes they'll be like, oh, that'll just go in the pile of my savings. Some
Right.
people, it'll like pay their rent for the next 8 years. So they're like, I need this. But if you're in his shoes, I'm like, I think I would wait for the 120.
Dude,
or was
I
he
gotta
devastated?
cash.
Like, was he like, I can't, I'm fine. Was he like Tiger King? Like, I'm never gonna financially recover from this.
His response, appreciate you riding with me, boys. We go again next week. I was like, oh, killer mentality.
Well, dude, if you're in that game, man, it can get you're maybe used to it. You're used to more pain than the average person.
Yeah, I'll send you the screenshot of it because it was insane.
That is funny. Well, that's the best bet of the day. Thanks for the support, Betway. And like I said, if you are looking for more tips or just gambling talk in general, we're going to be doing less of it on the show. And we're going to be doing more of it on the Betway feed. So link below for that. And then upcoming here, we've got a really special guest, JP. I forgot if you introduced him off the top of the show. Did you say who we're having?
Yeah, I did. I'll let the people know a little bit, but not a lot.
And of course, obviously the thumbnail is going to show him as well. So it's not really a secret what people are watching here, but yeah, we've got the Ben Rothenberg coming on the show here. And I'm going to kick to it in about 30 seconds. One of the most well-known tennis journalists in the game for a long time now. He's been a name that I've known around the tennis world for quite some time. He's worked with the New York Times, and he's worked independently and for a number of different publications, but I'm excited to talk to him. I do consider him a friend at this point because we've hung out once in Berlin, Germany. And he's a nice guy. I can say that. And he's definitely a hard worker. A lot of people might not like his work, but he has your attention, which in the media game is the name of it. So yeah, we'll kick to the interview with Ben Rothenberg and the three of us right now. All right, everyone. Welcoming Ben Rothenberg to the show. Ben Rothenberg, if you don't know, is one of the most widely acclaimed and notable tennis journalists in the world currently. He's been working the tennis beat, as you could call it, for years now. He'll tell us probably exactly how long. But he's notable for his work with the New York Times for a long time, and as a freelance writer, and now an author of a book about Naomi Osaka, which we're going to get into. He's done a few very high-profile kind of investigative pieces surrounding Zverev is the main one, I would say, and a few other different ones during his career and his tenure as a writer in the tennis space. We're very honored to have you on our show, Ben. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Steven. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Hey, quick question for you, real quick. Yes. I know you're based in DC right now, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
But you're a Flyers fan.
Yes.
How do we get to become a Flyers fan?
Oh, I was raised correctly. My dad went to college in Philly in the 70s when they were in their heyday, and he grew up in Miami Beach and knew nothing about hockey and sort of fell in love with the Broad Street Bully era Flyers, really at the peak of their powers in the early mid 70s. And yeah, that was basically we used to go to games a lot. Like we would get they used to play a lot more like weekend matinee games than they do in the league these days. And so we'd get like the package of maybe 9-10 games, whatever it was, and go up to Philly, probably not all 10, but we'd probably go at least 6 or 7 times. It's like a 2.5 hour drive from DC. It was not too bad. It's doable. And I was, as a kid, Steven will learn soon, babies can be very portable, or even as like a toddler or a kid. I was good at road trips and game for that. And so, so that was basically it. And I stuck with them, and they've been really mediocre for the last 12 years or so. They've won, I think, one playoff series in that time. So it's been a dry time for Flyers fans, which actually is. So I've never had the experience of, since I've been covering the tour, and with traveling the tour pretty full time. Actually, usually by the time I go to Rome, which is often my first stop on the European clay season, the Flyers have always been out every single time. The one time they won a playoff series was actually in the bubble in 2020. So that was they beat Montreal, and so they were the top seed in the East actually that year. That was supposed to be their year, the Corona year. So. So anyway, so they have not been great, but that's freed up my bandwidth for more clay court tennis, I guess.
You know what? That's a great sport. That's a great franchise to be a fan of. I think their tide is turning. I love John Tortorella. I couldn't tell "cutter from a hole in the wall" is one of the greatest quotes by a coach talking about these punk players coming into the NHL. So, you know, they got a very vintage like logo. They're not original six, but they seem like they could be almost. Or they're not.
They were the first expansion team to win a cup after the original six. So they came in the league as the next six in '68, along with like the Penguins and the Blues and the North Stars, and I could try to name them all. I think it's like the Kings, the Oakland Seals, who went defunct, and there's one other one.
Potentially the Oilers. I don't know.
No, Oilers were later. Oilers were WHA.
Right.
But,
so Ben is a great
trivia coming out.
Yeah, the trivia stuff. I can flex any way you want me to on this.
Before we start losing all of our tennis audience, we should talk about your tennis career because, as I mentioned, you know, it's definitely not an overstatement. You're one of the most famous journalists currently in tennis, and I would say of like the last 20 years for sure. And you've become very notable. And you know, would infamous be a favorite word or an applicable word? Because there's a lot of people who love you and love your work, and there's a lot of people who don't like you. And I don't know if
infamous is right, or certainly polarizing is probably objectively true on some level. I mean, just I find it fascinating and bizarre how much bandwidth I take up in people's minds, considering that I just don't think I'm this important. But you know, you mentioned turning the light on here, you know, there's certain Twitter account that's like obsessed with me and thinks I'm the root of all evil in sport. We'll get to that later.
We'll get to it. That is great.
But
you do take up bandwidth in people's heads, which is funny. And that's kind of my question is like, maybe just bring us back quickly to the origin of your journalism career. You're in school. Did you ever imagine yourself becoming a journalist that people kind of talk about more than, you know, beyond just like how good their writing is, you know, you're kind of like almost like a pop culture person in tennis. Did you imagine your career going this way?
No, I never thought I'd be an off-court tennis pop star or whatever you just called me. No, I think that I basically actually it goes back to the Flyers because my first sort of sports writing I did was for SB Nation for their Flyers blog, which is called Broad Street Hockey. I mean, a couple other guys did that. I had actually previously independent Flyers blog before that on Blogspot, and then kind of signed on to be one of their writers there. And then they at SB Nation they had a vacancy in their tennis person, and I like tennis, and I'd written about tennis like not too formally. I've been an active member of a couple message boards actually, which were a pretty big thing like in the 2000s, like around circa, you know, when I was in college, 06, 7, 8, those kind of years. And one of them actually was getting credentials to tournaments, which is bizarre this would happen. Credentialing at tournaments is not linearly logical now or then. I would have, I got to go to a couple tournaments and then basically started doing tennis stuff for SB Nation and then SBNation.com. And that's sort of how I started in tennis. So the Flyers actually were a little bit of an on-ramp in their own way to having more of a sports writing platform there. And no, but I didn't study journalism in college. I didn't go to college for that. I was an anthropology major at Michigan. Culture anthropology, and doing a lot of stuff on like European culture, which actually comes in a lot of Eastern European stuff, which comes in handy in tennis actually, as it worked out. But no, I was not I liked writing, but I did not have a very clear sense of what I wanted to do career wise. And then basically was just working as like a temp at various like miserable temp desk jobs and doing blogging, like, you know, trying to hide my tabs whenever people would walk by to keep that going for a while. I did. And was not doing that for like, it was also like during a bad economic time in the US. I graduated in 2009. So it was still a downturn then. And anyway, but basically I sort of quit the temping summer of 2011, just when the US Open Series was coming up, basically just so I could do more of the tournaments there, and wound up getting, you know, friendly with someone from a reporter from the New York Times, Karen Krause, who was covering the Cincinnati tournament, which I was at. And then she put me in touch with her. One of the editors at the Times, and they had sort of a blog that they hosted. They used to host a bunch of blogs on the sports page that were sort of individual sport pages. There was one called Straight Sets for tennis, and so that was my sort of foot in the door of the Times. And then I started covering slams for them, the next slam, I guess, in person at the 2012 Australian Open as a freelancer. I was always a freelancer for them, but I was a freelancer for them for like almost exactly 10 years, or a little over 10 years, because I did, first one was 2012 Australia and last one was 2022 Australia for the Times. So
Wow. Well, that's, I think a lot of tennis fans maybe I think I can speak for people, but like you kind of become a tennis historian just because I'm always like thinking back on what things happened in tennis, right? So 2012 for me as a Federer fan was like Federer wins Wimbledon again. I kind of started watching tennis in like 2010, 11. So I was like, it was like he had won majors. Is he ever going to win another one? And then that was the 2012 year. And it was kind of a different time in tennis and in journalism for sure, right? Like at that point you could get jobs at writing, and now I feel like people coming out of school are like, you got to come do a podcast, you got to do your own thing, and it's different.
No, I was writing about this actually, and so I started this Substack, skip to the ending, or the most recent developments basically, and I was sort of retracing my story and try to make some urgency behind it, and the Substack people who were recruiting me to join were saying like, here's what you do, and sort of say why you exist and why people should care or whatever. And in my post, basically one of the things I cited is my first slam in 2012 Australia, there were I was counting, and probably like 8 or 9 American journalists there covering the Australian Open. And this year when I was there, and I was really only there this year because I had the book coming out in Australia, and my publisher wanted me to be there when the book was coming out, and Naomi was coming back in Melbourne this year, making her comeback, or in Australia, came back in Brisbane technically. And and so this year there were 2. I was one of 2 American journalists, so like it really has shrunk.
At the Australian Open.
And if I wasn't there for the book, it would have been 1. I mean, so it really has fallen off, and I do think so. The sort of way the machine works, it's just changed a lot. I mean, social media was still very new certainly on like a business level when I was there, and it was like news when like, oh my gosh, X player just joined Twitter, how cool, like we're gonna get to find out more about this player from the joining Twitter, and it was like exciting, and most players were not on it. And so I remember when, I don't know, Andy Roddick or whoever it was, like maybe Roddick was actually a very early adopter of Twitter, but someone like Sharapova or Federer, certainly, like when they joined Twitter. Federer was actually relatively late, but anyway, it was still kind of coming together. And then when I was comfortable with it, and I think that gave me sort of an advantage over some of the older, more old school people who were there, that I was sort of able to find, I followed people on Twitter and could get quick updates and be ahead of people for those sorts of things. Even just following a lot of fan accounts who were very, active and had high rates of tweeting out news especially from foreign countries or different language stuff, and could just kind of had an advantage that way. But then basically, I mean, big picture, a lot of the content, use that word, about tennis over the years has shifted to being much more in-house by the tours, by tournaments, by individual players, sometimes themselves, and independent media, even on like a New York Times level, as I think has shrunk in a lot of its relevance for a lot of players and agents for trying to establish profiles and notability for their players. They'll still take the opportunity sometimes, especially certainly for like a New York Times probably has it easier than most because it's still cachet there. But the New York Times also doesn't have a sports section anymore, which ended a year after I stopped working for them roughly. It's been it's just a lot of things have changed, and so that's part of why I started the Substack, and we can get more of that later. But like basically, I just don't think there's as many places that really foster the kind of stuff I wanted to do, and certainly also like at the sort of metabolism I want to do it sometimes. To be able to do stuff on relatively quicker turnarounds, to not have sort of shop stories around or find an editor who has the right space or bandwidth for it at a given website in a given week. Right. But it's changed a lot in 10 years that way.
So as far as the book goes with Osaka, one, it's just crazy that you're sitting there, anthropology major, and then fast forward 10 years and you're writing a book about like one of the most famous female tennis players ever. How did it come about? I know on the little bio page it says, however they twist it, you started covering Osaka in 2014. Is that when your vision for the book started?
Oh,
or
no,
is that something that came on later?
No, actually, you mentioned that anthropology. Actually, I did take a class. One of my anthro classes in cultural anthropology was about like race and minorities in Japan or something, which is actually very relevant to Naomi as a rare, Japan's one of the most homogenous racially countries in the world, certainly of like developed big, industrial power countries. And so that gave me some at least idea that this was a phenomenon going on for her. But no, I covered her. I remember she first came on in 2014. If that year's getting used, we talked about her on NCR. Me and Courtney. Courtney had Courtney Wynn, my longtime co-host, was covering Stanford, where Naomi kind of came out of nowhere, ranked like just outside the top 400, I think, and came through qualies and beat Sam Stosur in the first round, and really kind of just splashed on the scene. Then it had this also like very like quirky personality and press conference that also got people talking about her more. The book, and then I sort of first met her and did a story for the New York Times on her at her Grand Slam main draw debut, which was 2016 Australia. It's not like that, a year and a half later, and she won WTA Rising Stars, which was their sort of precursor to Next Gen, before ATP took and probably enhanced their idea for themselves. And then, but the actual having anything about her as a book really started around 2020, after the tour was coming back from the pandemic stoppage. Naomi had become much more vocal during the pandemic, speaking out a lot more about Black Lives Matter stuff and protests during that time, and just generally just sort of finding her voice on online and social media, and where she's always been sort of more outspoken than behind a keyboard than she has been, or through her screen, whatever you want to say, than she often is in person sometimes. And a lot of her like big declarations in her career have been done over social media more than, at the podium of a press conference usually. And so, but yeah, it was during that New York period where she stopped play. She sort of was the one who forced play to stop in Cincinnati, the quote unquote Cincinnati tournament that was being held in New York at the US Open site. She was following the lead of the NBA players and WNBA, and maybe a couple other leagues that were stopping in their bubbles in Florida, around Jacob Blake, who was the most recent victim of police violence near Milwaukee. So it's the Milwaukee Bucks who started it, and then it sort of trickled out from there. But Naomi was one who brought it to tennis and did it very unilaterally on the player side. There were no other players were sort of joining that cause, and it was the semifinal round, so there weren't that many players left in the draws. But anyway, I was just struck by that, and then so I do have like my first. I was looking back at this at some point, like my first like mention of a book about her was that day that play was stopped actually, and then during the U.S. Open, she has the 7 masks, the 7 names of the people on them. And she also went to that tournament and sort of like calls, her shot there and invites this level of attention and distraction and all sorts of things that are very much against the sort of common wisdom from coaches about what you have to do to, stay focused and minimize distractions, and, anything political or whatever else is just a purely detriment. And she kind of inverted that. And so that's when I sort of really got into the book idea. And then, the next several months were obviously eventful for her too. She went to another slam in Australia, and then she has her whole stand up at the French Open with the press conferences and everything. So
this book is getting better and better.
Yeah, that made it wasn't that automatic, but it did. And then especially it kind of was actually stalled a little bit. But then when she lit the torch at the Olympics in Tokyo, she was the final cauldron lighter at the Tokyo opening ceremonies that August. That I was like, I texted my agent, like, come on, we got to be able to she's so famous right now. Like, we got to be able, she's so talked about. And I still felt like there was a lot that people didn't know about her, and a lot of parts of her early life, especially, had never been written about. I mean, she was coming up at a time when tennis coverage was dwindling a little bit, not quite as much as certainly it has by now, I would say. And also she kind of slipped between the cracks because she was representing Japan, but living in Florida. And so she was kind of off both radars in a certain way. And so there was not really, a lot of basic sort of stuff about her known. So there was a opportunity there to fill in a lot of gaps and hopefully give more context to this person who was very talked about, but I don't think her life was actually that well understood.
So when you decide to write a book about Naomi Osaka, like how much exposure to her, I guess, were you like given over the time of like your writing? Did like her and her team know about it, and were you given like enough access from your perspective to kind of do what you wanted to do?
I mean, more would always be better, sure. But I talked to her agent, like I think that day when play stopped. I think I mentioned in passing that like the book idea, and he was from the jump always like pretty receptive to it. I think once actually I got the book deal, I think she was with IMG actually when I got the deal, so it was a little bit different. That changed midway through working on the book,
right?
But they were kind of like keeping it a little bit at arm's length. They were certainly not like doing anything to obstruct it per se, but nor were they like over, tripping over themselves to be helpful or give lots of time. But I did, wind up basically traveling the tour in 2022 after I got the deal in late 2021 with the main intent of shadowing her And really was just going to tournaments just to follow her. Like I said, my last tournament for the Times was 2022 Australia. So the rest of that year, I was just basically on Naomi watch on tour, which wound up being, with the exception of Miami, where she made the final, wound up being, and you were with me in Berlin, because Berlin, I was there and she had pulled out of that tournament. That was like, that kind of stuff was happening a lot that year, where she would either lose first round or pull out of tournaments a lot. She lost, basically after Miami, she lost second round Madrid, pulled out of Rome, lost first round French Open, pulled out late of Berlin, like right after I got to Berlin, like she pulled out that day, I remember, or a couple hours after I arrived.
We should have been drinking beers. I think I knew that. I was like, oh man, I feel bad.
I was still learning how to do this, and excuse me, I was still learning how to do it, and trying to write the book while I was going. I mean, it was still a lot of stuff to juggle and trying to keep eye on the whole tour. Obviously, also like I'm going to Wimbledon. And again, she pulled out of Wimbledon like a few hours after I'd been there, after I landed, and I got there like during qualies week or something. I was thinking like, should I go home? Should I stay? I wound up staying and covering the rest of the tournament, which was fine. Although in retrospect, maybe I should have gone home and gotten more of a head start, because I was not as good at, this is maybe more too much detail, but I didn't find myself being as good at writing for the book on the road as I thought I would be. I'd done a lot of obviously short turnaround pieces on the road for newspapers and magazines and stuff for a long time, but something about the book and being that involved, I definitely was better in my home environment with my second monitor and sort of, just general more nesting kind of place that I have here. So I didn't really know what I was doing. And also it wasn't clear what the book was going to be, because my first thoughts had been maybe structured around sort of following her for a year on tour. Like I know Giri Nathan, who's writing this book this year about Sinner and Alcaraz. So he got them. He got those two guys splitting all 4 slams. Yeah, and man, got Naomi barely winning matches, and barely playing matches. And then the book actually probably came into a lot more focus. First, as she was clearly like kind of fading out of the sport, and near the end of that season, and pulled out of Tokyo, and just clearly her heart wasn't in it, and was she going to retire? So we were like bracing for her to retire, and she later admitted she was considering retiring. And then she announced that she's pregnant, and that actually was very helpful for sort of a clarity for the book of sort of knowing how this chapter of her life would end. And it was actually a pretty I think tidy finish in a certain way for this sort of chapter of her life, because most people don't write like biographies of 25-year-olds who are like notoriously kind of all over the place and erratic in their results, and they're tuning in and out of life and stuff. So she was a challenging subject for sure, but also like, and there's so much about her and so many different layers to her story and a lot to say about her. So no shortage of that despite her age.
Very cool. I think it's, it's kind of like a mark, like there's people who've written biographies of different tennis players over the years, obviously like Open by, about Andre Agassi, like very famous ones I've read. We interviewed Christopher Clary on the podcast here, talking about his Federer biography, which was really cool. He talked a lot about the old school tennis journalism days where the journalists would go to the tournaments and they would have like massive like budgets and they'd all be out eating at restaurants. And he actually, I think I've told JP this before, but he told me how he flew multiple times, I believe, with Federer on private jets between tournaments, just interviewing him. And like all of us like modern like tennis podcasters, like it's like literally just like a wet dream. Like you can't even like imagine that happening, and really in tennis media that's never happening. I don't think anymore for any writers, but I don't know. What do you think about
need a Walter Isaacson?
Yeah. No, I mean, like, but never say never on that, I guess. I mean, who knows what the future will hold, but right now, obviously it's certainly like a low ebb, and just, there's a lot of sort of, whether it's from agents, I think it's from agents more than players themselves, sort of sowing a bit of distrust in media, or just sort of saying that, they're not necessary, you don't need them, or it's better just to do things on your own, and sort of, various news stuff. And, obviously they do have the tools now to do it on their own. Like something, for example, like Danielle Collins this week, saying she's not actually going to retire and she's going to come back. Like that was something that she just announced via an Instagram post, or previously she would have done some sort of interview about that, and would have felt some sort of, or maybe a press release even or something, but like doing an interview about it, sort of explain herself, and it wouldn't have as much autonomy. I understand, thinking that's a good thing for them, but also I do think that a lot of times the right independent storytellers or outside voices can add a lot more to a story and make it much more effective. I don't think most of these players bluntly are like communicating themselves or telling their own stories like very very effectively. So
well, on that, Ben, like, what do you believe? Because you talked about it, like the trend in media, and I've seen it, is a lot more people don't really maybe notice it who aren't in media, but they just maybe consume it. A lot of it's going in-house, like the USTA or the US Open will be producing all these articles and hiring freelancers, or the ATP Tour is doing the same thing. And obviously those are both businesses that, and all the tournaments are, and all the tours are, that like to, they have an interest in making things look a certain way. So what do you feel like is the role in tennis right now for like an independent sports media that, like you said, is probably not being really, people are taking for granted potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you said is right in there, but I think the sort of glut of stuff that comes from the federations, from the business side of the sport, and it's kind of just a PR exercise internally for them a lot of times, means there's a lot of obvious important things that get left, not covered. And whether that's something, on the sort of more controversial or scandalous side, let's say about like, the tours going to Saudi Arabia and controversy over that, which everyone knows is there, but you're never going to read about that on the ATP website or WTA website, or sometimes even, like Tennis Channel's coverage is often, they don't do a lot of stuff that really challenges the establishment of tennis, and they're at tennis.com largely. I mean, that's not a complete blanket statement, but largely they don't really pick those sorts of spots to go for that. And they could, but they don't. And so that means that sort of big conversation is there, but even like, things that are not even controversial, but just sort of less, sparkly, something like writing about, let's say Coco Gauff's like problems with huge numbers of double faults, like what's happening to this like star that she's suddenly like spiraling in this category. Like that would be like a kind of downbeat or like concerned story that, again, I don't know that like the usopen.com is ever going to write that story, or about their defending champion, or WTA would write that story, or maybe Tennis Channel would touch that one, but still, like, there's just a lot of gaps in a lot of what they won't do. And that for me leaves a big open space of a lot of stuff done. And there's just too few people who are out there pursuing those sorts of stories. And that's sort of what I found, like, again, I'm in my first, I've only started the Substack recording this like on like the 3-week anniversary of it. Like, it really has not been very long. So I'm still trying to figure out like where there's value for it, where it sort of makes sense. And I actually wound up like not doing, I don't know if anybody noticed or care, but like I didn't wind up doing like a story on like Rafa retiring announcement. I did a podcast about that. So I did kind of say my piece on that.
Right.
But I just felt like that was art. People knew Rafa was covering. You read any sort of number of Rafa takes and testimonials and memories. And I have those too, but I don't know if mine are that special that they would be really adding anything to this very crowded space. Like, instead, like I went and did this like deep dive into like the Halep decision that came out the same day from Cass. And it was sort of like, this just feels more where I can like add value that's not going to get covered probably the same way. Certainly not by, again, the federations, and probably not by the sort of more cozy tennis publications. It felt like a space where I could do that. So, and there's a lot of opportunity there. I think that's, it's tricky. I don't want to, that is sort of my reputation for being more of, I don't know how much cursing there is, but someone who stirs the pot, let's say, whatever's in the pot. And I think that, that's not all I do, but certainly I do feel like there's a huge dearth of that in the sort of tennis media ecosystem right now. So I feel myself overcompensating for that by sort of having to keep, stretching myself into more edgy stuff. I would happily write about, what does it mean for Tommy Paul to win Stockholm and continue his great year and beat, the race for number 8 in Milan, which is, all valid, fine, inside the line stuff. But that was, to me, less sort of, that would get covered by whatever people were out there. Whereas like, I felt like kind of being a little more critical about the Saudi, situation was what I chose to write about over the weekend instead. So
a la Casper Ruud. But yeah, JP, I know you got a question about that here.
Yeah, exactly. So I read your article that you wrote. Also, congrats. I saw they created some posts that you've already got like hundreds of.
Oh yeah, they maybe like this little brag thing. Yeah, I'm not allowed to say the word Substack. It's you like shadow banned on Twitter if you say it, because Elon is ridiculous.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that was
but that's cool.
Thank you.
And I read
it's nice that people are signing on to it. It's been cool.
Yeah, definitely. But I read the article, And then, so I was curious what your thoughts on Casper Ruud's comments where, they asked him about it and he's saying, look, yeah, there's issues, but there's issues in a lot of places we play. So it's kind of weird to pick and choose. What kind of do you make of that?
So actually, when I was first trying to figure out what to write, I was actually going to, part of me, and I might still do this at some point, probably not, now that the ship has sailed, but I was going to write something about Stockholm. Like there was this one reporter in Stockholm who was asking like a lot of questions and getting like a lot of interesting stuff from various players, kind of all by himself. And this was actually like a really strong field for a 250 that was there in Stockholm. And he seemed to have like these players like totally to himself. There was like no one else there. I've been to Stockholm, actually. It's a cool tournament. Very like old venue. It's all like wooden benches and stuff. And this is it's a pretty cool place. If you're ever in the market for a fall 250, I can recommend Stockholm. But that guy was asking questions about like the Saudi thing to Casper Ruud, and it was asking him, I think, also something about like taxes or something, and how Norwegian tax laws work. And he's debating moving to Monte Carlo. I guess he's one of the players who hasn't done that yet, and getting out of the tax obligation that way. And it was great because it led to all these like interesting conversations being driven by someone being there asking like relevant, interesting questions, and Casper being like very game for them. And as was Andrei Rublev and Dimitrov were the other two who I saw this guy talking to. I didn't know him before this, but he was sort of making an impact and putting out good stuff. And I was sort of just like, this is like what we're missing. It was great. It was great to get it, but it was also like, this could be happening like all the time. And it was just like this one guy with the right sort of attitude, or taking the opportunity, showing up from his Danish newspaper in or whatever kind of Danish outlet he's with in Stockholm, and getting like this like really interesting conversation driving sort of stuff. And Casper, I think, was taken aback by like how, because Casper would not have done a lot of questions like that in his, because it's also been a gap for myself and for other people that like I think a lot of it fell off abruptly during the pandemic too. And so so guys who came up kind of during and after the pandemic, which Casper would be one of those people for sure, who kind of really became a more relevant player post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, wouldn't have had as much exposure to sort of those sorts of questions and that sort of scrutiny, if you want to call it that. And so, so he was a little bit like, whoa, this is like, if I actually say interesting things, people will be interested and this will cause conversation. But I thought it was a really great testament to, so I just wanted to kind of give that guy a shout out. I should know his name, but
for sure.
But I was going to do that on my post if I'd done it like a sort of item thing of like, here's 3 things from this week. The second one was going to be about like Stockholm actually players say interesting things for a change. Isn't this great? Shouldn't we want more of this? And I think it is. And I do think like so many fans, even ones who like bristle at the concept of journalists asking like questions that make players the slightest bit uncomfortable. Because I think in any sort of player versus media, this goes to any athlete situation, any sport, fans will always side with the athlete every single time, because it's just who they're rooting for, who they care about. They're the ones who are putting butts in seats, and they are the show, they are the product. I, of course, get that. But at the same time, like I think you really do see a lot of value add from these situations, and finding out like about Andrei Rublev nearly getting his, as you said, his ball amputated from some sort of sound like a testicular torsion situation. I don't think sound pleasant. So, but yeah, even that came from people asking questions in media. And again, like they're in a different world. There could be like, I think NFL, I want to say, or maybe MLB, maybe NHL even. Their reporters, because they have a lot of reporters too who cover these sports, more than the tours do. Certainly, they have a lot of in-house reporters at those .coms for those big leagues, and they would certainly ask if there was something like Andrei Rublev mentions vaguely some amputation risk that he recently had. That would not go unasked for long, in a sort of more robust media sport. But in tennis, it could sort of slip under the radar for a long time. And it might have never gotten asked if it wasn't for this. I would have probably forgotten about it by the time I next saw Andrei Rublev. So whenever that would be. So anyway, I just think that it's a lot of benefit to having this be a healthy part of the ecosystem. And I think you kind of this week in Stockholm, maybe I'll still write about it, but maybe it, maybe this is a case for it. The other thing I wanted to say about it, I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on this too, just media and also consumers of it, but like, it seemed like also part of why, and this is another generational thing, but part of why those things were getting traction was that there were video of these quotes. And this guy, who I think is some sort of writer, was posting his quotes as video, was filming press conferences. And I feel like that is like the content of choice is definitely something that was not around when I was there. And I've done it a couple of times myself in the last year or so. I'm like at a press conference and asking a player a question. I might actually like go on YouTube and like rip the video of the press conference to post myself asking this question from the official video. Just I know it'll get more engagement. People will actually watch it more, or they'll like trust it more somehow, or they'll get the emotion of it more, whatever it may be. And so I'm just curious, like if people think that I should, pivoting to video for certain things like player answers at press conferences is actually
I mean, I think
went a lot of different places there, but that was something else I was wondering about this phenomenon, this guy in Stockholm this week.
Every single week in the NFL, there's a viral video from a player doing a post-game press conference right in front of his locker, and it's a phone video. And I think the same thing would happen in tennis if obviously those guys probably don't want you in the locker room, but getting more video content out there, I think changes everything as far as the coverage goes.
Yeah. Well, maybe something I could start filming the interviews. I haven't done it, but get a little unipod and go to town.
Yeah, you should do that. I've been, when I was in Europe, I was given different levels of access to do that. Like,
well, you have your famous microphone too. You had a whole brand.
So I started with
videos.
These racket handle. Right here. There you go. The racket handle mic. And that was good. It was funny. I was going to mention about Stockholm. That's one of the tournaments I was given. Like, I went there, and then I was looking through our Twitter thread, and I was like bitching to you about how I got no access in Stockholm. Like, I flew there for Shapovalov, and I wasn't able to talk to Shapovalov for like 3 days. And I was like, it was insane to me. And then, but these small tournaments. But then in Gstaad, I was there, and I was doing, one-on-one cameras with like Team Berrettini, and I had like a 15-minute sit down with Casper Ruud where we talked about golf and the Live Tour and stuff like that for like the whole time. So, but to answer your question, in Montreal, Stephanie Miles, another reporter, sometimes controversial, she was complaining, I think, about how she took a video from her phone like this while she asked a question. And I think Tsitsipas talked about his coach or his dad. And essentially that's right when they broken up as a coach. And that went crazy viral on YouTube, like 70,000 views, which was a lot for her, her channel.
Mm-hmm.
But then other people are using that video without giving credit. And then it's like, well, like what, like you kind of just, it was a mix zone. You just stood there with your phone. Like you didn't do any creative work. You literally just captured it and uploaded it. So I'll just say it's confusing space. Like a lot of, like in a press conference, a lot of people like don't want you, like a lot of the ATP guys will be like, put your phone away if you're taking pictures or anything. So it's a weird space to be in, but in the mix zone, I see people doing that. And it's an easy way to get views. I don't know if they're not like your work, Ben, is like really quality writing. A lot of like, that's why people read it. You're going to get views from these videos, but it's not going to translate to like people watching your or reading your blog or whatever.
I mean, theoretically, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the sort of conversion rate would be on that. Like if someone's looking at your Twitter feed or, there's a video about something and then there's a link to a full story about it or the longer version of the video, whatever it may be, maybe that would get clicks. I don't know. Like I'm not super into, but I do have to be concerned about these things as a journalist. I had not that doing clickbait, but just sort of knowing what will engage people. And even just the basic version of, I don't think one is more, low brow than the other, the block text of the quote versus the 40-second video of the same quote, like is one better than the other? I mean, sometimes the text is much faster to read. If you're just scrolling, you can read the whole quote.
Sure.
A video can actually slow you down quite a bit. And some websites obviously want you to slow down and spend time with them, but is that really better for the readers or for the producers? It certainly takes more time to like edit a video and upload it often, although transcribing can take time too. So it's not nothing there. So I don't know. I think it's just something I'm sort of thinking about for myself going forward. Like, the video, like obviously, I don't know if you followed, this is not tennis, but there was this whole controversy in the WNBA with Christine Brennan, who was this like USA Today reporter who asked a question to a player, Carrington, who was on one of the teams, who basically like was accused of like elbowing Caitlin Clark in the face or something.
Yeah.
And Brennan, who's this like old school USA Today reporter, like uploaded a video of this like exchange and some sort of media scrum like on her Twitter. And it was just sort of weird. And also it was weird because it was a very like awkward, uncomfortable exchange. And just sort of the player looked like annoyed and dismissive of it. And I was like, why would you upload this video of this person like clearly annoyed by you? What are you doing here? And it wound up really blowing up in her face because I got a lot of backlash to that question. I don't want to get into the whole, like, is that, good or bad, whatever. Mostly bad, I think, short version. But but just basically, that sort of being this like very old school print reporter but still like pivoting to video in certain ways. I just think is interesting. And like, yeah, the tennis YouTube space that, you know, you guys are in and stuff, I think is interesting. It's not something I really have any foothold in, but there is obviously audience out there. So maybe something, you know, whether it's just filming my own podcast that I've been doing for a long time and putting it on YouTube, that would be the easiest sort of way to add that, or what. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't know what the audience is for that. Certainly there's a lot of podcasts that just turn on cameras. I don't know how much it adds to them or not. Not that you guys aren't, you know, gorgeous to look at throughout and everyone will be glued to this, but yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of sort of questions again about the sort of changing landscape, and these are questions that we're not having in 2012, basically.
For sure. And I like how you talk about there's a big gap for people that like ask questions that are like, or follow stories that, you know, these tours with business interests won't do. And obviously, like, we can't talk to you without talking about I would say the main story of the most controversial story you brought forward is the Zverev Sharipova story. And, you know, it's not new news, so I don't really want to go through like the entire like backstory to how it came about. Like, people should go read your work. It's really well done. It's very in depth. And, you know, so where I guess my main question on that is because it's like the most recent part of it. You know, when you got, I guess maybe you could explain to the audience what the legal situation is at, because, you know, you asked for fundraising on Twitter, and maybe let's just start with when you went and made that ask, because obviously, you know, a lot of people don't have 30K lying around or however much you were going to have to pay. What did you expect would happen there? Like, did you expect the response that you got, which was an oversubscription and over fundraising to your original ask?
No, definitely not as fast as it happened, for sure. I thought people would be, you know, hopefully sympathetic, but I had no idea. But it reached its goal of $22,000 in like 22 hours, basically less than 24 hours it took from the time that I shared that the Washington Post article went up, and I shared the link more broadly. I'd made the page a couple days earlier, but hadn't shared it anywhere. But since then it took 22 hours. And that was really amazing and humbling and remarkable and great. And I didn't know what it would be. I thought, you know, at least it would defray some of it. I wasn't 100% sure it would reach its goal, but any bit would help, because, this is an expense that I hadn't anticipated incurring. Basically, this case, and there have been two different cases. One about the racket article, which came first, and the Slate article, which came second, about Zverev and the accusations against him from Olya Sharipova, which he has denied. But the first accuser against him, there's another one also who I have not spoken to, who sent her own interview. The German publication, newspaper, so Deutsche Zeitung. So basically the second case, which from the first article from Racket like agreed to go into this like appeals round of it, because the lawyer was saying we had a good shot at doing that and thought that the first judge didn't hear it properly or something, but said the chances on appeal were pretty good and recommended going for that. And then basically Racket just sort of backed out. And this goes to like other sorts of chaos that's been happening at Racket. But they've had a messy divorce over there. And so I was sort of the child of this divorce, suddenly abandoned. But then also like left in this appeal stage, which was sort of a bonus round of this case in a certain way. But I couldn't just drop it without having to pay some sort of significant fees at that point to reimburse legal expenses and court case costs and Zverev's court costs. But there still is a chance we'd win it. So anyway, so I saw the crowdfunding as this opportunity to raise this money, obviously to help with my own, possible debts. But then also, like, if I do win, it's still then having this set up where all the money that doesn't get needed goes to charity. I thought it was a great chance to turn this negative into a positive, and it has been that. Like, I think the final number was like 37,000 for the GoFundMe, which is incredible. So like, assuming there's no like really unexpected escalation in costs, which I don't think there would be, it's going to be like at least 15,000 worst case scenario for the charity, the domestic violence organization here in DC that I picked for this, which is great. And so won't know anything more until at the earliest, unless something happens to settle it, which I don't think is going to happen, until the next court date is December 5th, I think. So it's going to be a couple months until then, and who knows what that'll get resolved right away then or what, I don't know. This whole the whole legal proceeding, it's in German, A, right. So I don't speak German, and B, like the whole sort of the decisions don't always make logical sense to me, and their press laws are very different. Like, there never would have been an issue with a story in a U.S. court, and it is still sort of annoying that like it is subject to international law when it was a American publication doing an interview in America, apparently for American audiences. I know that's a different issue, but
yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. So essentially, like, what was Zverev charging you or pressing charges for? Is he just suing you for slander, or what is his charge?
No, it's not slander. I don't think it's defamation either. Again, I'm not an expert in this, so like I don't know, but it's something that would not apply in the U.S. Basically, it's sort of like Germany has, and I don't want to mischaracterize this, but it's to my best of my understanding, Germany has like what they would call privacy laws, and basically there's more protection over what you can say about public figures, basically, and their personal lives. I guess it would be something about his accusation, his defense, or his legal standing. And right. I'm not sure. I was really like not in the driver's seat of this case until all of a sudden I was thrust into it, and so I just sort of, this is happening, but kind of on the back burner. And then again, I'm now kind of in the backseat of this case again, just because the lawyers are taking care of it. And case Sarah, I don't know what's going to happen with this case. In Berlin, there's kind of out of my control. But yeah, it's not defamation. It's something more about like, is there enough proof to make the specificity of allegations or something like that? It's sort of like more of a standard of reporting thing. And he's not like asking for, as far as I know, I don't think he's asking for any like damages or anything. It's more just about sort of like an injunction against the story, I think.
Oh, to get it to stop, the story to stop.
Yeah. And so, and then separately Racket took it offline too. So it's kind of this like weird situation where you're like fighting a cease and desist for something that's already desisted, but you can't just drop it.
I'm not exactly sure what you want here. It's
all just like that part of it's all like, again, as an American, it's, all the things I said before about like, believing and telling, difficult stories or whatever. And I have no regrets about pursuing this story. I thought it was important once I sort of learned that these accusations were out there, on social media. And in their initial form, they were in Russian, and they were also sort of just like a little muddled and kind of hard to follow on the initial social media posts. And so once I learned that Olya was in New Jersey, so like a relatively short drive, away, that to be able to understand it better, I felt like I had an obligation as a journalist covering this beat to understand what this was about and to then communicate that to audience and readers. And so again, I would have felt like way worse for, this is kind of maybe a personality thing. It's going to sound like I'm blowing my own horn here, but like I feel like I do sort of follow through on these things and kind of like go down more rabbit holes that people are like more tentative about or afraid of than other people do, just as my personality running towards the burning buildings, which does, I guess, occasionally get you burnt. But I still feel like that's sort of my personality. I would feel like I was really, negligent in my obligations or derelict in my duties if I wasn't doing that.
Well, and that's, I get that, like feeling like, it would be like the sin of omission. It's like not doing what you felt was like the right thing. But you say you didn't expect this expense to come in, which is definitely makes sense because you're like, okay, some international court, this was all done in the US. But there's a lot of tennis fans who I think thought that, like, in their opinion, like you kept on going with the story beyond what was just like putting out what the accusations were to like kind of put notice of them. So some of those people think that you were kind of like, they would just expect, I guess, a reporter to like say, these are the accusations. Oh, Zverev, you deny them. Okay, we'll let the police handle it. But you kind of kept going with it and maybe telling the story to more depth, and which is totally obviously allowed because you free speech in America. You can do whatever you want. Why did you feel, that you didn't kind of like, or did you feel like you took it personally and kind of like once there was such a pushback from Zverev, did you start to kind of take sides in that story? Do you feel?
I don't know if I took sides. I will say, I mean, the actual cases are still just based around the original articles. It's not at all about basically the case over the first Racket article. It's just what was written at racketmag.com in November. Was it November? It's right during the 2020 election. I think it came out in November 2020.
Wild time.
It was wild time in a lot of ways. And so, I went up there before the election. The story came out while the election was still like pending, undecided. There are other things going on in America, but that story
Stop the count.
Like, exactly. During Stop the Count era was when the story came out. And, it was also during pretty peak COVID and isolation. That was like the first time I'd gone anywhere to do any sort of, or like meeting a stranger in their house. Even that level, it was like weird during COVID. sorry. Yes. So, but and the case is about that. So the case is not about like the actual material of the case. It's not at all about like any haranguing or like continuing on about this.
Okay.
There. That's not material to the Berlin proceedings. I'll just put that out there. But myself, yeah, like I did feel like I cared about this case and felt like I wanted it to be taken seriously by tennis, capital T tennis, like the sport of tennis, and whether that means the ATP Tour, whether that means fans, whether that means networks, broadcasters, whatever that may be, other players, and I definitely felt like that was a tough thing to sustain. Like certainly in the moments, in the very short periods when people read the articles when they came out, so like November 2020. And the next one came out like August 2021 for various reasons. There was like this sort of like stretch of like, oh my God, like reactions. Then it would kind of just like fade out and people would kind of move on. And again, this goes to the media operations we were talking about earlier. The ATP keeps normalizing Zverev and keeps treating him like nothing's happening and just sort of carries on like that first week. So that November 2020 week was the week of Bercy, I think. And so like Bercy that week, they like stopped. Maybe it was the week after was Bercy. I don't know, but sometime around then was Bercy. And they basically like didn't post about him on their social media, or like very minimally, like only when like a final score, and like the Bercy social media, maybe Tennis TV social media, like was very like clearly like something's going on and like being, like at a distance. But then by the time it got to, World Tour finals in London, like a week or two later, like they were kind of back to normal and everything was kind of normal from them. And I just sort of felt the sport moving on. I don't know that like people can judge themselves if I was like too, banging the drum about it, but I just felt like I was again compensating for this like profound silence from everywhere else. I felt like my voice, continuingly, yammering about it in the entire choir of voices in the sport made it at sort of this like very low level, which was better than nothing. And without that, sometimes it would have been nothing, would have moved on. So yeah, I don't know if it becomes too much. I don't think that it became ever too much of a crusade or whatever. I don't think that it became like something that I don't feel like I was ever unfair about the story or even like blowing it out of proportion. But I do just think
I'm sure you. Sorry, go ahead. Well, I was going to say,
I just think again, like I just didn't think there was anyone else doing it. There was no one else picking up the baton and going with the story further, right? No one else was like doing like meaningful, in-depth follow-on reporting. Largely, it was very, very rare that anyone else in this tennis space, any of my other colleagues or outside reporters were doing it. And so I felt like I didn't want the story to be about me. That was never my goal in the story. But like, because no one else was doing it, I, kept having to be the one sort of mentioning it. And it wasn't only me, but it was largely me. Certainly people of my sort of amplitude of audiences, I guess. And again, it was frustrating, certainly during the US Open. I remember that very clearly when 2021 US Open happened right after the second article came out, that like it was never mentioned during any of his matches on ESPN. That was like pretty jarring to me that they didn't do that.
And I was going to say, like, you obviously, it sounds very like you took her side, but you would have asked Zverev for an interview, and I'm assuming he just didn't.
Oh, I did ask him. I gave him a chance to respond to everything that was like he was on the basis of this whole, like, before the article comes out, this whole like long bullet point list of things. This is kind of standard reporting for lots of stuff. This happened with Naomi book even too, in like a different way. Like here's like all the stuff that we're reporting in the book that like has not been published anywhere previously. If you would comment on or clarify whatever, and shoot, Naomi was game and was very engaged with that and kind of went through this whole fact-checking checklist kind of stuff and saying like 95% of it was like yep, and then like 5% was like, well, this wasn't exactly how this happened, it was sort of this way, whatever, which was great to have her engaged and present. And as a reporter I want to be accurate, and certainly did the same stuff, sent long lists of she says this happened, then she says this happened, she says this happened, she says this happened, this other person corroborated X time and also said this happened, there's this photo, scratch marks on your neck, whatever it may be. I don't think a lot of people have actually, I think fewer people have read the stories and they realize, or haven't read them in a long time and kind of forget what the details were. There are a lot of details in both those stories. Anyway, but so I would have happily talked to Zverev, still would happily talk to Zverev about it if he ever wants to come forward. But then also, again, there was also this, I didn't want to make, by the time the second story was coming out, it was already like kind of clear that it was being seen as like my crusade too much. So I didn't want to be the one to go into a press conference at the US Open and like have some big moment that was me on video, again, mentioned video about
Right.
like some sort of like showdown there. So I was like hoping other people would do it, and they did that one time a little bit, but like not like, and they kind of had like, maybe I think there were literally like 2 questions at the US Open, and then kind of he gave some very sort of strident
denies
responses
it on stage, and then it's over, right?
Yeah, and he says things about proceedings that maybe aren't necessarily that are not leading people to the correct version of events, let's say, and whatever that may. I don't remember the details exactly of it, but basically, he doesn't get followed up on, and then he starts playing matches, and it gets forgotten, and he doesn't get press coverage at all, really, for better or for worse. In, you know, the rest of that tournament, he loses semifinals to Djokovic in that particular case. And then this year, actually, at the Australian Open, this goes to kind of the Stockholm thing again, like having a reporter in there who's motivated can change things a lot. There was a reporter, a pair of reporters from Australian papers, from the Sydney Morning Herald, and maybe from the Melbourne Age, which are kind of like sister papers. And they were asking questions to Zverev and about other players, 2 other players about Zverev, because the court date just got announced for his trial with Brenda Petea, his second accuser. And also he just got elected to the player council that had been announced in January. So they were asking questions about that. And again, that was like getting it reanimated the story. And it was just nice to have some other reporters finally like picking up the torch that I had never meant to carry solo for so long, but so many people in the sport who had opportunities to cover this, whether that's individual reporters, whether that's, you know, media companies that chose not to do it. That's certainly broadcasters. Because I just didn't know, like during the US Open 2021, with no mention of the story on ESPN ever, like what percentage of the audience knows this is even out there, or what percentage of the crowd in Ash knows this is there. Like it would be very easy to miss it if you weren't like sort of a degenerate tennis Twitter user. Yeah.
Hey, have you seen? Oh wait, sorry, Steven. You can go ahead.
Go ahead, JP. Go ahead.
This is quick, and you can jump into yours. I just want to know if you've seen the new Apple TV show Bad Monkey with Vince Vaughn.
Mm-mm.
You would love it because it is essentially, you would relate to his character because he is this police. He's like a detective in Key West, and he's always getting into things, and like ultimately he wants what's right, but the other people at the police station, they're not doing the job. So like, hey Yancey, just leave this case alone. He's like, no, I can't. Like somebody needs to be held accountable. But you would like the show. It's on Apple TV. This is not a paid ad. Vaughn did not pay me. Steven, continue with yours.
No, I try not to, I appreciate that. I try still not to be like too like, again, like high-minded or snooty or whatever, getting, you know, blowing my horn or whatever, or every, you know, I'm good and everyone else is bad. That's not what I'm trying to say. Like, I do think that, I wish there was more support out there. I wish there was more appetite. 'Cause I do think that the audience is not stupid. And I do think people will respond and engage with things that are there. And I know from the number of notes I've gotten from people, you know, who cared and were appreciative that I was keeping this sort of going. A lot of whom I heard from during the crowdfunding were sort of saying, you know, people, names I didn't know, people I didn't recognize, but who had been reading stuff and been appreciative that I'd been sort of doing this there, and were showing gratitude through that format, which was nice. Or even, you know, at various Naomi book events, there was almost always some question from some person about Zverev and the sort of Zverev case and why has it not been covered more and stuff. And so people do care. Like, again, that goes for this case, that goes for the Saudi stuff, it goes for whatever other issues, you know, we're talking about in the sport. Like people, tennis audience, yes, there are some people who will be like, stick to sports, you know, whatever. But that's not the majority of people. There's just kind of loud, mostly idiots, largely say that. I mean, generally there's like, or not idiots, maybe harsh, but like, if you present something in a compelling way, people have certainly understood why this was an important story especially when they read the detail and the severity of the allegations against Zverev. Like no one could come away from that story being like this, you know, just stick to, you know, forehands and backhands or whatever. So I think there's like a missed opportunity in tennis to have sort of more in-depth and challenging topics and conversations for people out there, so their brains don't get too smooth.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. And so, like, would you consider yourself like, you know, there's an activist investors, but there's like, would you consider yourself a bit of an activist journalist? Because there's been different times where you've kind of taken up causes like this Zverev one, where maybe it's been a little bit outside of just the forehands and backhands for sure. Like there was the kind of, I think one of the ways we made your name was like Neil Harmon, like, and that was a case where it was like a journalist plagiarizing, and but that was something that you kind of got famous for. Like, oh, he writes about stories that aren't comfortable for people in the industry or in tennis in general to read about. And there was also the David Adler kind of controversy, and there's been the Zverev. So it's that, like you said, it's kind of your personality. Like you don't shy away from these things. Would you consider yourself someone like who kind of takes it upon themselves to go uncover these kind of uncomfortable stories and run with them?
I mean, those are all different cases, but broad brush, probably yes, I guess I would say. I mean, I do think, I definitely am less hesitant about that and more of a glutton for punishment or suffering, if you want to put it that way too. Or again, like running towards the explosion or the fire, whatever it may be. But not doing that, I don't think, recklessly, and not doing that just for the sake of it. I'm not trying to hit every third rail possible. You know, I do think that all those stories or the moments, whatever you reeled off there, which again, all are different, are worth doing. And we're, and, and there's other stuff I have, people, then know that I have this reputation and then try to tell me stuff like, oh, you should go look into X, Y, and Z other dirty things I've heard about in the sport. Right. And so I have some of those I'm working on currently, for future posts on bounces, hopefully. Different sorts of field stuff. But yeah, again, I think it's part of the journalistic sort of, not there's like an oath of office or anything, but like if there was like, like doctors or politicians have to take oaths, but basically like, like trying to do something to share the truth or to speak truth to power, if you want to be more high-minded about it or whatever it may be. I find myself wanting to do that and feeling that that's necessary. And again, it doesn't make life easier. And I do think that, I have thought, and, certainly before I started the Substack and kind of reanimated a bit here, was like, there might be a natural kind of shelf life or expiration date I have as a journalist there. Eventually I just, within tennis, I pissed too many people off and no one wants to sort of think I'm more trouble than I'm worth to sort of, accommodate. And I've gotten some sense of that certainly from ATP over the last while since the Zverev stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm comfortable with the way I'm doing it. I've been doing things and, just trying to do my best with that. And, again, would love for more people to do it too. I don't want to, and I don't think I'm totally alone all the time. Again, that maybe it's a little exaggerated, but for a lot of stuff, like I do have this, I've become synonymous with like any sort of uncomfortable reporting. And there's lots of people in the press room who are, full-time staffers at various places who could easily take up these sorts of stories or mantles or torches or, investigations, whatever they may be, and do them. And so often they're not.
Yeah. And I guess it doesn't sound, it sounds like you've kind of made peace with that. Like, do you look back on any of those stories? And I get they're all different. Do you kind of have regrets of any of the if you want to call them like fights you've picked with different people?
Again, you could get into specifics if you wanted to, but like broad brush, like mostly no. Like I think, again, I feel pretty comfortable with how I've done stuff. I'm sure I've made mistakes with things. I'm sure I've, tweeted, thoughts that weren't fully formed or whatever, more on the sort of just being a snarky jackass kind of side of things. But nothing that like comes to mind is like some grave error of judgment or values that I can think of. No,
we've all tweeted half brain things, and that leads me to my next question, which is, what do you think? And I think our last question, like, what do you think is the current state of tennis Twitter? Because that seems to be where everything lands nowadays, and we've got guys like Pavi G who have serious issues with you, and a lot of the Djokovic fan base, and they, they'll lob grenades into the Nadal fan base, and they'll lob grenades into everyone else. And it seems like, I don't know about you, but complete chaos, but I also can't look away. Like, I feel like everyone is on that site right now. As you've been online for a long time now in the tennis Twitter space, where do you think it's at right now? I think
it's degraded a bit from where it was when it was, from its maybe heydays. I think there's a few factors in that. Like, I mean, a big one I'll just say early is the Elon Musk era of Twitter. I think it's done several things to sort of promote and encourage the wrong things. And a lot of that is not even like about like anger or, crazy tribal fan stuff, which is a real thing. That's been going on for quite a while. I mean, Federer and Nadal fans certainly had their stuff. Sharapova versus Serena fans that was going on, back in those early days of tennis Twitter as well. That's been kind of foundational. But a lot of the stuff that's just sort of been much more content farming kind of stuff that's come on Twitter. Basically, whenever Elon, I don't know exactly what year it was, whenever they changed the blue check system, basically to de-blue check all the journalists and other people, most tennis journalists, including, did not have the million plus followers you kind of need, or maybe some high 6-digit number, whatever it was, to keep your blue check automatically. I think it was maybe more than 1 million. And then sort of other people got blue checks and then got these unlimited tweets and just started putting out these like I can name names, like the Tennis Letter is the most notorious one in my mind for this. It's this account that just sort of puts up like long quotes that were often without attribution or something. And they were sort of like taken like whole cloth, like long, sometimes like article long, a text post they would just copy and paste from somewhere with, no original work of their own. And then kind of, because they were amplified in the system and they were good. They were smart about knowing how to get engagement or how to phrase things in certain ways that would get people doing that. They put photos again that they stole from somewhere or whatever with these stolen quotes. And someone started adding attribution, but also often also had this like really like smarmy, like little like heart emoji at the end of whatever the quote was, and just stuff that again, like as a journalist just makes me like shudder. Because we have no love for anyone. No, just that this again, it was just sort of presented this like really kind of mealy way that was just sort of like, this is weird. And I just had a distaste for it. And it definitely was stolen. The stealing and the plagiarism stuff is definitely objectively bad, I think, beyond whatever sort of, overly cutesy posting they did with it. And then there were several other accounts like that too. They were just kind of the biggest and most successful of those. And even a few other established accounts started doing a little bit more of that too. And then, so that discourages, reporters. Like there were definitely reporters who, I was working the book mostly when this trend was happening, so I wasn't the most subjected to it. But certainly, I had colleagues who would write like a whole interview with somebody, and they would post it, and they would take time to transcribe it and do all the stuff, and get their editor to do it, and get paid for it as a freelance or whatever. And then they'd see like within less than an hour, like the entire substance of every single quote, like all the Tennis Letter's account. And like, and again, this and some of those other accounts too, would see the Tennis Letter getting engagement from this and make their own way of doing it, and also do it, and again, that was just sort of piracy, basically. And that's very bad for an economy. Most pirates in most situations. So that part's been there, and that's still there. Like, and I've sort of shot a general broadside in Tennis Letter's direction. I don't know if I blocked them. I don't think I blocked them because they do want to sharing a lot of stuff because they are so voracious in their reading and reamplifying. I do end up seeing some stuff when it gets retweeted in my timeline from them. Then I try to go find the original source for it and then share that if I can. But that's been worse. And then some of the, you mentioned Djokovic chants, I think specifically can get called out as being a uniquely overheated, let's say, fan base. I think which really kind of started. They always had a bit of an edge to them, but not notably worse really than Nadal fans, I would say. Federer fans were always found the most chill because like their guy was just sort of like beloved and the most popular and had the most slams for a long time, and like. They were kind of like had the least insecurity about their player, whereas Nadal fans would feel overlooked, and certainly Djokovic fans felt overlooked by both of those sort of behind both those guys. But then during the pandemic, like with Djokovic, his early anti-vaccine comments, and then his the not Corona Tour, that's not what it's called, the Adria Tour, excuse me, turned into the Corona Tour. Adria Tour, like sure, I mean that was the complete slip there, but. But the Adria Tour and like it sort of and then eventually it gets to the Australia standoff, and I was certainly doing a lot of reporting on that. In Australia, again, that was another thing that I just sort of dug into that more. But there was also time people were kind of like not really in Australia yet, and I was there early because Naomi was playing early. And then for myself, they see me as like personally responsible for getting Djokovic deported, and have like held it against me ever since. I don't really think I can take blame or credit whoever wants to assign whatever for me for Djokovic getting deported there. I'm not a minister of the Australian government, and certainly was not at all conversant in their immigration appeal laws until that month. I just quickly learned all these things about that case. But then there's been this sort of irrationality ever since. And certainly they have certain cheerleaders of this, who are sort of loudest voices with their own blue checks and with their own sort of weird engagement strategies and various unwellnesses they bring to the table. And that's again the thing with Twitter that you think his name, but like the thing with Twitter is too, like everyone just a little picture of whatever. Sometimes it's your face, sometimes it's not, and then your name, but like. You're not sort of like you can just be anybody from anywhere, for better or for worse. Like, it platforms everybody. And so, like, if some person just sort of like ranted themselves in their own, urine soaked clothing at a bus stop or something, on Twitter, they're just a person with a handle and a name and words underneath. And you have to kind of like learn your own. I don't mean that as any disrespect to people who are urine soaked at bus stops. A lot of them, I'm sure, mean well, and are not trying to do anything nefarious at all. They're just,
what are you saying about the urine soakers, Ben? That's
no judgment there. I feel bad for even maligning that community. But you know what I mean? Like, basically, like, there's no sanity check on social media. And so a lot of people at various moments of less saneness, if they're not consistently, and sometimes people are consistently off the deep end, and other times people have their moments of just kind of being irrational, or what is the word for it? Overreaction to stuff, basically, like sort of like disproportionate reactions to stuff. There's a better word than that, but something, people go overboard with certain things, certainly when it comes to this sort of, when you add in the tribal nature of the fandoms and stuff. And and with Djokovic also, there's the Serbian angle, and lots of Serbs have their own history, and he means so much to that country, and he's this huge national symbol for them. And not that all the Djokovic fans and most of the most sort of ringleaders on Twitter are not Serbian, actually, but some of the people are anyway. And and then certainly with myself, like, I became this like character in Serbian tabloid media circa 2022, and they're doing all sorts of posts about me and all my various keeping up to date on various nicknames for me in various Serbian tabloids. And again, like, why does anyone care? Like, I just don't feel like I'm this. I said at the beginning, I don't feel like I should be important enough to engender this much thought and concern. But for somehow, as this sort of like, if not big fish, kind of like, I don't know, flashy fish in this kind of small pond, then
I'm definitely, Twitter is like my favorite social media because of all these things we're mentioning. I mean, the burners, they piss me off the most, but there's also nothing more. It brings me the
burners?
most joy. I have no burners. I hate burners.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
I
hope no one, like anybody on Twitter, is like posting from burners. That'd be really sad.
Oh,
posting from burners. I'm sure some people are.
What do
you mean burners, Ben? Wait, what do you mean?
No, I think he means like secondary accounts, right? If you like more than one account, what you're saying, it's like basically, it's like a common thing for like NBA players to have burners, basically. Like, it's something where like they go after their haters for some burner account.
Right.
I've certainly never done that.
Oh no, of course. But
I'm not saying you said I did, but yeah.
Oh no. I love going at these people, like who you're talking about. They're like, they're hiding behind whatever. And then you put something out, you can piss them off, and then they respond, and then you reply back with either taking the high road or doing whatever, and it lights a fire in them that they already can't live with themselves because they're hiding behind something. So then you take it that next level, then you build your own brand. But I also feel like tennis Twitter compared to NBA Twitter or NFL Twitter is very immature, and it almost kind of reminds me of WNBA Twitter now. Like, the eyes are on it, and now people are getting upset when people are making funny videos of Angel Reese highlights, and it's like, why are y'all doing this? Blah 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 blah. I'm like, this is the internet. This happens to LeBron. This happens to whoever. And when I see the tennis people getting upset, I'm like, guys, this is the internet. This is how we do it.
This speaks to one of my general points, which is this goes to players too. I think of honest agents and parents and coaches, whatever it may be, and media and fans too. Tennis is so soft. Like, again, because totally. It's so soft, because there's not the critical mass, like you said, of NBA or NFL reporting, certainly, and it being constantly like knowing if you have like some like dumb low light, people will be memeing it and you get posterized, whatever it may be. And some of that, I think, is like could be probably it's overboard with NBA, like posterization culture. I think is kind of silly, and sort of like people getting humiliated by getting dunked on by some amazing player. Like, what was the other option besides not getting dunked on? Like, running away to the side of the court to get out of the way of the dunk. I mean,
don't tell me you feel bad for them though, Ben.
No, but you're right. But the WNBA point is interesting too, because they have these sort of growing pains. It's like really fast acceleration of growth in the last season, last year, with Caitlin Clark arriving. That's been the main driver of it. And and I think this goes to tennis too. Like, the sport always preaches wanting to grow and stuff, but I'm actually like, part of me obviously is wanting, people to sign up for my Substack, bedrothenberg.com. Go anytime. I haven't plugged it yet, but but also like I ended for fan level, like I would be pro gatekeeping, like more people showing up with dumb opinions. I don't want them. Like tickets getting more expensive because there's higher demand at the US Open. I don't want that. Like, no, like let's stay niche. Let's like keep my sport small and affordable and just like around these people. Like growth, I don't actually think is good for fans most times in a sport. Or if you're like a fan of even like a band or whatever it may be, if they go from playing, you know, small venues to playing arenas, that's not great for you. So like, yeah, root against success for your faves, basically.
Yeah,
my advice there. But the soft thing is real, and like even like, you know, we were talking earlier about like there's not softness per se, but like Casper Ruud having like very little experience like fielding like remotely tricky questions, like that would not happen in any other sport. Right, any other sport he'd get like constant, robust coverage and would be pretty experienced by the time he's been in 3 Grand Slam finals and whatever else he's done in his career. But like still, there's been this sort of softness, and again, yeah, I certainly have seen that where. I remember it was like, I can tell the story. He's retired now, but like Jack Sock during his like biggest slump, like he was playing so bad when he came back in 2018 and was like he finished the year. Remember 2017, like winning Paris-Bercy kind of really out of nowhere, and then making the semis of the World Tour Finals. And he was so bad immediately in 2018. And I just remember tweeting something about like he lost in the Australian Open. He was awful. And I tweeted something basically along the lines of like, I forget what exactly it was, but like he hit like 0 winners in the first set of his loss or something. I was like, this was like a terrible set from Jack Sock. And his agent being like, come on, like you gotta be nice. Like his, you know, his feelings, whatever, he's nice. Whatever. It's like, he's a top 10 player who's playing like crap at a Grand Slam. Like, what do you expect? Like, this is like, you sign up for this. Like, and maybe it was from him. Maybe he sent her on that mission to sort of, you know, chide me for being mean, but like, come on, like you're it goes to American men too, slamless American men for the last 21 years. Like a lot of they've gotten it much easier than they could have from a lot of sports.
And Riley Opelka like complains about people bringing that up. It's like, dude, you guys are the players and the fans and the journalists, and
almost no one's ever assigning individual blame to a single player. No one's ever like, man, America's men's tennis is slamless because of Sam Querrey. Like, that's not how the conversation goes. Like it's pretty much always.
Well, he definitely didn't help, but
he did his part. I mean, like I think he did great and fine. But the conversation for me is always more about who's not there, right? So like the players who don't exist, more than like
you're right. Actually, Sam Querrey probably did help. He could have helped. He did beat Djokovic one time at Wimbledon.
He made a slam semi. He
could have opened the door for somebody else to win a major. But who else was there at that time? Like John Isner could have happened.
Querrey and Isner were the guys. And again, like I don't think anybody looked at them and saw them as like slam champ caliber guys. They were in the mix, and in other eras, something like a Querrey or Isner could have gotten a draw breaking open, but draws were almost never breaking in their eras. That no one made a final until Taylor Fritz is really surprising because they were like there for a while. So, but like they just were they were this era of incredible consistency in men's tennis results they were up against.
To me, it's like don't complain because whoever does get the first slam as an American after the drought, the platform is going to be that much bigger because of how much people talk about it. So we gotta get right. We gotta get right.
Yeah,
tennis is very soft. Do you think, last question, what do you think a guy like the king of, you've talked about the tribal people on Twitter, Djokovic fans, the king of them is Pavi G. We've seen you guys go back and forth, or maybe more like him just go at you.
Yeah, it's one direction there.
Where does someone like that come from? Because he's actually a rare example of a total troll who actually has like his real name. Well, obviously Pavi G is not his real name, but he has like a link to him being the president of a tennis club in England. And I've looked it up and it's like a real club. And he doesn't actually hide his personality, which is kind of funny, but he's like, yeah, I guess where does that come out of? What
you would have to cause someone to do that? I look forward to hearing him on your next episode when he comes on. No, honestly, like again, like
we are inviting him.
I don't know anything about his personal life. I don't know about he had a club in England. I'm wishing him well. I hope that he's lives his life with more balance and restraint than he does his internet presence. I think he has to be still alive in this world. And you know, this is an outlet for him, and people get wrapped up very intensely and seriously and emotionally in their favorite players. And I will say Djokovic actually, this is a positive thing, but Djokovic is very, very generous to a lot of his fans. And so Djokovic will get like Pavy and some of the other people like tickets to center court Wimbledon, like, and sit behind his box. Like those people are there and like in the mix. And Djokovic, that's obviously an extreme example, but other times, Djokovic just goes out of the way to like talk to people or mingle with fans at various tournaments, certainly sign a lot more autographs than other big four guys did. And that's really positive. Like I've said before, if you're like a fan of one of the big four, you have the best chances of having like a really great face-to-face interaction with Djokovic of like the four at a given tournament. I mean, it's all like, luck and get on the right day, the right mood, whatever their schedule may be. But like Djokovic has been really good with his fans in that sense.
Ben Rothenberg, Djokovic supporter.
Huge, I have a ton. This is the thing. Like, what I was never like. I got ascribed all this like joke. Anytime a Djokovic like wins a match, like he beat Taro Daniel in the second round. Like you must be hating life right now.
That's what
like. It's like I really like. Again, if I was like as miserable about Djokovic wins, people thought I would have ended things a long time ago. Like the way that people think that I'm like so distraught over Djokovic wins. He's been by far the most successful player of my like tenure in tennis. Like he's been the guy. He's been in men's tennis, certainly. He's been the guy, and it's been fine. I've not suffered through this. It's not been a hardship for me that Djokovic is winning. Yeah, I thought he was like an irresponsible citizen in a public health level during the pandemic. But it's pretty limited to that. Like, never like, and I can even say the same for Zverev. Like, it's not like these guys win matches and I go cry. Like, it's not
only sometimes.
Okay, fair. That's your life. I respect that. But like, it's not that kind of. I'm not that attached to it, and I'm just not as a journalist, for better or for worse. Like, I'm just kind of more distant and numb from it than that. Like again, like the more fans, and I appreciate the fan energy that kind of powers people caring about the sport enough to consume and read all the stuff that I put out there on Twitter or other spaces, benrothenberg.com. So that's all fine. But again, it does go overboard, and people assign all this like motive to me of being anti-Djokovic or obsessed with Djokovic, miserable about Djokovic, obsessed with Djokovic. Also, he was like the number one player in the world during all this time. Like,
have to be.
He was number one player in men's tennis. How could I not pay attention to him? How could I not cover him? How could I not be like, whether or not this guy plays the U.S. Open, it's a big deal, even if it is directly determined by his vaccination status in 2022. Like, you can't ignoring those. And he didn't want to play in that tournament. It wound up being the reason he skipped that tournament and missed 2 slams in 2022, like at the peak of his powers. So, that was like very, very relevant. It was not me like putting something in there that was my own like agenda. This actually was like this was competitively relevant to the sport, and to the GOAT race and all those sorts of things. Like it really mattered what his status was for those tournaments. So people are goofy and soft, to use those words there. And I feel like if there was like, again, if I was in the NFL, there'd be like 40 of me, and it wouldn't be the big a deal. I'm just kind of alone in this. Maybe not 40, maybe like 10.
Yeah. Last one. This is super quick.
Sure.
Gun to head trivia.
Okay.
You have to choose one topic. What are you most confident in? Which topic are you most confident in trivia?
Probably like general trivia would be tennis, obviously. Like that's like, like
minus tennis.
Like I am generally my better categories is geography stuff. I was regaling you guys earlier before we started with my deep British New Brunswick knowledge. So that it exists is big knowledge in the US. So that was big. And geography, I was like geography as a kid was a big one. There's a few other more niche things like individual TV shows, but like broad category, probably geography.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming on the show with us.
JP.
We got to do a lot there. I feel like I could do a sequel for sure. Maybe we will. But yeah, where can people find you right now currently with your work in tennis?
Yeah, hopefully people go to the aforementioned a couple times benrothenberg.com, which is where Bounces, a domain I've owned for like 12 years and never used before. So it's nice to finally get to use it for something. It's my Substack newsletter / website, Bounces. I'm doing a couple posts a week at least there. Not maybe advisable to launch a tennis thing in October, kind of a slow period, but tennis is a very newsy sport. There's been a lot of stuff happening. Soft launch. Yeah, it was a pretty hard launch in the end. But yeah, hopefully it'll be fun getting to do it during a Grand Slam come January.
Yeah.
And see how that goes. But yeah, it's been fun doing it, kind of stretching I hadn't done any like consistent tennis writing since doing the book, which is a very all consuming thing. in 2022 and 2023. But after that, my muscles were atrophying a little bit this year. So it's nice to get them moving again there, and people have been enjoying it. So hopefully, you can sign up for free there to get all the updates. And then some of the articles are like paywalled midway down. So if you want to read the whole thing, you can subscribe for it's like $7 a month. Hopefully worth it to support the cause and all this sort of high-minded stuff I was saying earlier, and just to piss off Pavi G, whatever your motivation is. I did actually have someone donate to the Patreon of my podcast once, saying this is tell Pavi G that I gave you like $50 or whatever. It's like, okay, like sure. Thanks. I'll take that. Thank you. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That is great. Well, man, thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being on the show. I appreciate you being a friend of the show, as we call him here on The Slice. And we'll catch you next time here on the show.
Yes. Great to meet you. Hope to meet you in person at some point.
Sure.
And it was awesome. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was I love talking about tennis. I can talk a lot, as you've experienced. So no problem.